understand the disaster that was the past 2.5 months, but if you were in my house, my wife and I are welcoming your participation in parenting. Particularly, by the way, the custodians and the bus drivers and the cafeteria workers, because if they eat one more piece of crap in that car, I would also like to then address you as a professor and criticize you because you keep sending us students that don't know how to write. Wouldn't that suck if that was actually the presentation I was going to give? I don't know about you guys, but this is that year when you suddenly mention your profession and like everyone's welcome to critique and begin talking about exactly how you can improve your job, right? And by the way, I've seen your students, they're doing fine. The hangover should pass soon on the campus. It's going well. So, why am I here? What does it matter? What does it have to do with libraries? I want to talk to you today. We met over the summer to think about what we could do with the keynote. What should we talk about? And we ended up with this delightful phrase, technology-enabled participatory learning. Now, if there is a worse title for a presentation, I dare you to find it. I mean, this just screams of buzzworthy, buzzword, gobbledygook. Oh my goodness, what are we going to talk about? But if we break it down for a moment, it's actually something that we have to wrestle with, right? So the first part of that technology-enabled, okay, great. So we're going to talk about iPads in the classroom, right? Yeah, but we're also going to talk about how that impacts the entire enterprise, the entire activity, from GPSs in buses to understand where you are. I don't know, once again, about the situation you're in, but we have this elaborate chain of people in Jamesville where it's like the Pony Express, the bus is coming. The bus is coming. Oh, Fred's coming down the driveway. I can see the driveway. And we go down the driveway and someone can see us. And so we're all out there ready at 8 in the morning. This is, my 14-year-old is about to be a very unhappy person. He's first year in high school. He has to wake up. He can't beat up his brother quite as often. It's going to be fun. Cafeteria workers. It's very interesting when we talk about technology, we need to talk about unintended consequences, good and bad. So I don't know, once again I apologize for my ignorance of the specifics, but if you guys have moved to an electronic payment system, it has interesting consequences. Like we actually know whether they can eat or not. We can actually prevent bullying because the lunch money isn't in the kids' pockets anymore. I, as a parent, can find out exactly how bad my child is at getting himself into debt. Right? I don't see out a letter at the end of the year. He's $3 behind. You're like, what? So anyway. We can talk about how technology we can use to teach, technology, how we can improve the efficiency. We can talk about RFID readers to get in for security. Technology-enabled really means looking at how technology changes the entire school system, not simply how we deliver instruction. We need to think about, with a technology plan, how do we pull these systems together? I can now find out what my kids' grades are actually before they do. Right? I can find out that he's failing in Spanish. It's not, by the way. If he's failing in Spanish, before he knows. I mean, I don't know about your high school experience, but my high school experience consisted a lot of perfecting my father's signature. Right? Where's David today? He will be sick. I have to tell you, I was like 4 days away from like suspension because I missed too many days, and my mother is now suspicious. And so she comes to me and says, "What's going on?" I said, "My throat's sore." She goes, "We're going to the doctor." I had mono. It was, I don't know how I got it. I recommend actually keeping some cultures with you at any time. If you knew me in high school, it was not the kissing disease for me, I promise. So we can talk about how technology changes all of what we do. But I'd like to start, if I may, with a story. And in doing so, I'm going to, sort of a story with this story, I'm going to exhibit the worst possible college-level instruction. I'm going to read something to you, and I apologize. And Jen here is one of my students, so I apologize because you're about to hear it again. But this is how, as you guys are getting ready to go back to school, last week was Syracuse University's first week. That meant that we were getting ready to go back to school. And as a college professor, that meant that I had to teach on Tuesday which meant Tuesday morning I was putting together my syllabus. So I tell, when freshmen come in and they're like really nervous, I said, bad news. You just left the last professional educator you will touch in your education. You're now stuck with me, right? So, I'm going to read you a story. This is how I teach the class the Introductory to Library Science. This is what every incoming librarian has to deal with in the summer and in the fall. The Arab Spring had come to Egypt in early 2011 on the heels of a successful revolution in Tunisia. Egyptians took up to the streets to demand reforms from a government regime that had been in power for nearly 30 years. While much of the media fixated on protesters who occupied Tahrir Square in the Egyptian capital, Cairo, many protests started in the port city of Alexandria. In Alexandria, as in Cairo, people from across generations and the socioeconomic scale rioted to demand liberty, justice, and social equity. In an attempt to restore the Constitution, what was seen primarily as a peaceful uprising led to the deaths of at least 846 people and an additional 6,000 injured across Egypt. On January 28th at 6 p.m., after the prisons had been opened, releasing murderers and rapists onto the street, all security withdrew from the streets of Alexandria. Roving gangs of looters took to the street to take advantage of the chaos. In Egypt's port city, the violence and looting devastated government buildings. Where offices once stood, only burned-out rubble remained. Protesters went from building to building, pulling down the symbols of a corrupt power. Some looters then began to eye the Library of Alexandria. President Mubarak, the focus of the uprising, had opened the modern library in 2002 at a cost of $230 million. According to the library's website, Mubarak built it to, quote, recapture the spirit and openness and scholarship of the original, unquote. The famous ancient Library of Alexandria. As it became apparent that the library might be in danger, protesters joined hand and surrounded the library. Their goal was not to attack it or raid it, but to protect it. Throughout the protest and looting, the protesters, women, men, and children, stood firm and protected the library. In essence, they were retaking the library for the people. After the uprising had subsided, when President Mubarak had stepped down and the protesters were celebrating their victory around the country, not a window of the library had been broken, not a rock thrown against its walls. Why, in the midst of tearing down the regime, did the people of the nation protect the library? That's how I start the class. And we go on to discuss the answer to that riddle of why they didn't tear down the library. Is because the librarians did something remarkable. They did their job. From the opening of the library, they did their job. They reached out, served the community, found community needs, put materials where they needed to, started new services. It's practically a museum. They helped do that. I say that because many people look at these librarians and they think of them as exceptional. And I say that is a bad word. They are brilliant. They were brave beyond belief. But they weren't exceptional because if they were exceptions to the norm, we set our bar too low. So these are some images. That large flag you see in the upper left-hand corner, about 30 feet long, the protesters came up to the library. All the librarians were literally locked in the building. And they sort of knocked on the door, and the director sort of peeked out and said, yes. And they said, do you mind if we put this flag on the steps of the library? It's the protest flag. And he goes, no, that's fine. Every day when the protesters in Alexandria would go to rally, would go to march, would go to protest, they would touch the steps of the library and that flag as they went forward. Over the years of it being open, just about 5 or 6 years, those librarians had earned the community trust, and this was their treasure. This was the community's treasure. The after effect of this, by the way, is remarkable in that suddenly the best internet connection in all of Egypt is at the Library of Alexandria, and taxi drivers and mothers and people who had never thought about a library walked in and said, I hear this Facebook thing might be interesting. What exactly is a tweet? Now, the reason I tell you this story, and because we're like, rah, rah, yay, library's great, but you're not librarians, all of you. And nor am I here to teach you or train you into being librarians. I tell you the story because, once again, I start every class with this story. This summer, I started this class with this story. And whenever I tell this story, whether it's to a class or in a presentation, we always sort of say, the students sort of get a little anxious. And librarians get a little anxious, like, am I expected to, deal with bringing down the government? Is this really? No, I'm not quite sure. And we sort of laugh it off, no, that would never happen, never happen. And then I had a librarian student who happened to live in St. Louis. Ferguson, Missouri, as of 2 weeks ago. Ferguson, Missouri, a white cop shot down an unarmed black man, left him in the street for 4 hours as they cleaned up, created massive riots in which the residents began to riot and loot. In response, a militarized Ferguson library, who served a primarily African-American population, even though they had 3 out of 53 cops were black, began to take out all that wonderful anti-terrorism equipment and showed up in the street in camouflage, body armor, helmets, Humvees, armored transports, and sonic disrupting weapons, and fired rubber bullets into the crowd and fired tear gas. Now, this is the story we all watched, we all heard, we were all terrified of. NPR did a fabulous, fascinating story on the situation in which they were interviewing. It turns out that not only did the governor institute a curfew and put people in their houses, he closed the schools. And so this NPR story was in a household where the children were up at midnight, 2 a.m., unable to sleep because of the firing of bullets and explosions and riots. Their parents sat up all night and took turns watching the front door with baseball bats next to them in case trouble came to the front door. And we had a library in the middle of this. We had a student who was part of this, and suddenly something interesting happened. What happened was she decided going into the library one day that she would set up art stuff in their auditorium. She set up some art supplies. And she'd order some pizza. Why not? And this began getting around. And then what happened was the Ferguson Library was open, small library. Excuse me. They opened, and they began to say, what can we do, what can we do? Anyone happen to know what they did? The art teachers from the closed schools walked into the Ferguson Library and said, why don't we have school here? And so what happened was soon the English teachers started showing up. Soon the math teachers started showing up. Soon they ran out of room in the library, and so they began reaching out to local Baptist churches where they would have, all right, high school's going over there, middle school's over here. And for that week, they began delivering instruction. The school building may have been closed, but the teachers, the parents, everyone came together to make school happen. There's another unintended consequence that you might have guessed, which is when the schools are closed, a large percentage of the Ferguson School District, you may not identify with this at all, is on free and reduced lunch. That in essence, those students sitting alone at midnight hearing this disruption were also hungry because there was no food that they couldn't get from school. So the Ferguson Library began offering food. They began getting volunteers to come in. They held classes, provided the lunches, provided activities and distractions. The art museum showed up, professors showed up, the teachers showed up. And this, so we all have that proud pop-up moment when you hear a student who does really amazing. This is what a student said in response to a reporter who came in and said, tell us what you're doing. This is what libraries do. We supplement our educational system regularly with school programs and summer programs. We provide free lunches all summer long through collaboration with Operation Food Search because we recognize that a large portion of our community qualifies for free reduced lunches. You have one of my students here too. So there's a riot. Jen, you're in charge. All right. What I want to point out about this story and how I want to get into the notion of technology-enabled participatory learning, God help me, that's the phrase, is the library didn't do this on its own. A school can't do this on its own. A teacher can't do this on its own. They had standing relationships with food providers and food pantries. They had standing relationships with local and community outreach. They had relationships with the school system, obviously, with museums, and these were network connections that weren't formed the day of the crisis. They were ongoing relationships that they had been working on and maintaining for years and years and years. So when they said, let's put on a show, they had the phone numbers ready. They were calling. And not only that, but they could go ahead and mobilize resources at split-second notice. Now, I'm sort of lying here because I don't know about you, but one of the things that drives me nuts is when we talk about libraries doing something or schools doing something. A school can't do anything. A school, at its best, exerts gravity and shields you from the rain. It's a building. It's people that do things. People, teachers, custodians, bus drivers, community members, board members. People make these connections happen. And they're vital and important. And we need to talk about how do we constantly do it. The other thing we can learn from the situation is that this all happened in a technology-enabled environment. Once again, buzzword, what does that mean? It meant that they didn't have to walk over and say, how you doing today? Though they did a lot of that. They could put out a tweet. They put out a tweet saying, help. And librarians began forming book clubs where they were sending them tons of books. And once again, the university professors began showing up and saying, what can I teach? How can I help? Parents were saying, how can I help? One of the things that happened is, in this neighborhood, in Ferguson, there's a huge transportation problem. They can't get out of Ferguson easily, so they were bringing food in, they were bringing water in, they were bringing supplies in. Through Twitter, they were coordinating this. Through Facebook, they were updating the community. They were rallying their community support to make this happen, and technology allows it to happen. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk a little bit about, as we implement technology in schools, what are some of the obstacles that we're going to face? So there's a classic, if you go back, and you're old like me, you go back to the days of the Clinton-Gore administration and the rise of the internet. So put your mind back in 1992. I don't even remember 1992, but I'm sure it was fabulous. So in 1992 and 1993, the internet was a bunch of text that you were typing back and forth. And someone came up with this really cool idea that you could put a picture next to the text, and they called it the World Wide Web. Now, some of you probably go back far enough to remember Mosaic, which was this ugly green thing with an S in the corner. And you were like, why is there an S in the corner? But it was there anyway. So we began looking at the internet. And the government began to say, how can we help? And they were specifically looking at urban and rural populations, because the suburbs kind of handled themselves. But we were seeing a disconnect. This technology-enabled change, technology-enabled education, connected education was interesting, was going to be cool, but urban and rural folks couldn't afford it. So we developed things like E-rate. We developed things like broadband technology initiatives, all these kinds of things. But then they created this wonderful phrase that made everything okay, called the digital divide. That we had students and populations that couldn't connect, right? Now, for my new teachers, you will not understand this. For my more seasoned teachers, you will remember this. The divide was we didn't have enough computers. So what do? We put in computers. How did we do it? First day of classes, in rolls the computer, onto the desk, look at the teacher and go, yay! And the teacher would look at that and go, no, right? We didn't have curriculum for it, we didn't understand how to implement it, we had no training for it, but that's okay, we have a computer, we're technology enabled. Right? We had the most expensive, beautiful paperweights. Do you remember when monitors were this wide? And I'm not talking the front of the monitor, right? When you turn them to the side. Where if you were in IT services, it was like we had to replace the monitor in room 5. Right. Hernia-inducing monitors. It was great. Right? But we began putting these computers because we said, now they have access. That's good, problem solved, go home. Turns out, didn't do much. In fact, if it did anything, it ticked off the teachers. Yay, that's where we want to be. Right? What we learned is that there's the way that you handle access is you don't bring in the computer at the beginning of the school year. You bring in the computer at the end of the school year, and you don't put it on their desk. You send them home with the computer. Because what happens is you say, I want you to take this home. Why? I don't care. Do Facebook on it. Do Twitter. Email. Lotus Notes? Really? Lotus Notes? I'm sorry. I just pissed off some people. I've been really close to mothers now.
We just upgraded to a new version 3 weeks ago.
There's a new version of Lotus Notes? Oh my God. I mean, really, it's like, staple gunning a satellite dish to a donkey at one point, isn't it? You have broadband connection, but is that where you can do it? All right. So we send the computers home. We give them access because people who took these home, teachers who took it and began looking at pictures and began sharing and began tweeting and began doing whatever, began integrating it with their life. They began seeing how this was useful to them. And so now when they brought those computers back home, back to school, they could begin saying, oh, I can do this with it, oh, I can do that. By the way, I want to take care of something really quickly. All those people who are worried about technology because the kids know more about the technology than you, get over it. It's their job to learn. I mean, we always are, why don't teachers know this? Because they're busy, right? As grown-ups, we have a job. And it's not to sit at home all day going, hey, I can break this. Hey, look, that filter's gone. Hey, proxy server. This is not. Yeah. All right. So access was the first digital divide. But what happened is we realized that just having access wasn't enough. There was another divide, which was the knowledge divide. How do I use this? How does it work? What can I do with it? What are some exemplars? Show me some best practices. Bring in some teachers who've done this. Let's have a day like this where we do show and tell. Train me. I mean, the one thing that is amazing to me is that we look at technologies like smartphones and we assume that somehow they're magically able to work. It's kind of like the idea that people were born knowing how to use this technology. This is one view. Don't know if you noticed, that's a book. That's right. It's a piece of technology. Anyone ever see the medieval help desk video? Go to YouTube, medieval help. How does it work? Well, you hope this is how you turn it on. That's very interesting. Does the text disappear? No, it's maintained and stored over time. It's hilarious. I heard your mission is to prepare college graduates. A huge, huge, huge percentage of what you do, and you have my utmost respect in doing it. I say that sincerely. Is teaching people how to use this technology. We call it reading. Right? It's not natural. People aren't born reading for a reason. It's not like, it's a boy, and he apparently likes Chaucer. That doesn't happen. So we have to teach people how to be technology fluent. We get tons of undergrads showing up with these things, and yes, they know how to do things with them that we never thought of, and that's okay. But let me ask you a question. I'm going to do a quick survey. How many hours, and let's just pick a day, 2 weeks ago, you remember what you're doing. How many hours on a typical day do you spend on the internet? How many people would say about an hour? How many people would say 2 hours? How many people would say 5 hours? How many people would say, I don't remember, I think my kid was in diapers last time I looked, right? Okay, ready? So, how many people have a smartphone? Any phone that can surf the web, can send up a picture. You are on the internet 24 hours a day. And that's not an exaggeration. I mean, now with Edward Snowden, that's not a surprising revelation, I hope. You are on the internet. You have a device in your pocket, near your person, in your house, that can take pictures, that tells you where you are, that tells you what you're doing, tells it what position's at. There is a researcher in Harvard who can look at the GPS data on your phone and within 98% accuracy tell you if you had the flu. Why? Because your phone does this a lot when you have the flu, and every so often it does this. Ugh. Ugh. Right? Whereas if it's in your pocket and moving around, you're not sick. We're looking at tracking everything with this. So we have kids who show up and they say, I can do things with this you never knew. And I say, yeah, watch this. I can do things you never knew were happening, like where you were last Thursday and who you were with and what's happening. And suddenly they get really freaked out and they start listening. You're welcome to use that as an educational strategy. Creep out your kids, more than just with what you wear. And then we then had teachers that had this technology. They knew how to use it, but we had to create an environment in which they felt safe using it. What happens if you try a lesson using that technology and it doesn't work? Do you have a backup? Do I have IT support so if this hard drive goes out in the middle of it, someone's going to fix it? Do I have the ability to work with the latest technology and I'm stuck with something 38 years later? Elliot Soloway used to talk about schools as a peasant culture. And I'm sorry if that's offensive, but I think it was intended to be a little bit. And it's Elliot's problem. And what he said is that in many cultures, those who rise above the rest, in old hunting cultures, those who got more meat than the rest, those who got more resources than the rest, would on a regular basis have meetings and dinners and such to give away the bounty because the culture wanted everyone to be the same. Now, I believe that you guys can create a culture where people can excel and not feel like they're excelling at your expense. That's the kind of culture we need to create, that if you're good with technology, be good with technology. And we're not going to sit there and go, oh, well, they got the latest machine. Well, they know how to use the latest machine. It's okay. As long as they take the time to teach me what's going on and see what's happening. An environment where, once again, the kids knew more about this technology than I do. Well, are you being evaluated on how much you know about technology? Is that something you're going to be looked at? How are you going to be reinforced? How are you going to take this information in? Bus drivers, GPS technology is great because I know when the bus is coming. Though if you take one swerve wrong, I'm going to look at your fuel consumption. Is that the environment that we want to create? How do we create an environment where teachers have the technology, they know what they're doing, and they feel comfortable and safe in using it? How do we create a cafeteria environment that doesn't... Everyone see the story last year, the big story about where they refused food to people because they had a debt? Right? It turned into a national news story. How do we create an environment where we can be humane, where we can be smart, where we can understand that it doesn't interfere with what we do? And the last part of this was the idea of motivation, which is, I've got the technology. I know how to use it. I feel safe using it. I just don't want it. There's going to be a lot of I don't want it. Right? I had one of the best professors I had taught me statistics. And he brought out the overhead. These are the days of the overhead projector with the slides, those pieces of clear plastic. These slides he'd used so much that not only were they cracked, they were yellow. Do you know what it takes to turn plastic yellow? Apparently about 30 years of throwing it on a slide projector. Now he taught stats, so it's not exactly like you went, oh, that's an average, that's brand new, let's put it in. But this idea of why would he change? Why would he put it on? We have this situation now. If you ever want to see a hilarious picture, you should see the professors in the iSchool running around because they've taken all the whiteboards off the walls. And they've replaced them with these really cool, because we're the iSchool, it's going to be really cool monitors. They're LCD monitors. And you should see the faculty walking in with their pen sets. I'm one of them, Jen can attest. And sitting there going, okay, where am I going to do the chalk talk? Where am I going to do the drawing? Where am I going to do the writing? They created a technology, and I have to say, what's my motivation for doing it? Should I bother learning how to do this? Because, it's just going to change tomorrow. I know you guys have never had a situation where you sat there and said, oh, a new strategy to improve education. Oh, wait. It's Common Core. Yeah, give me a second. What is it now? Okay, Common Core is that. All right, just checking. What's our motivation for doing it? What's our reward system? So this is the idea of technology, how we can become technology enabled. For this district to become technology enabled in all it does, we must bridge these gaps. Okay, done. What was that second part of the title? Oh, that's right, participatory learning. Where does that come in? I'm glad you asked. Are you creating or worsening the divide? Are you the problem? Because here's the trick. Think about for a moment, when we talk, what our mission again is to produce high school graduates. I assume well-functioning, caring, loving high school graduates. Would the loving, caring, and soon-to-be high school graduates please stand up? Oh, that's right. They're not here. they played for us at the beginning. It's very interesting that we talk about this. We talk about the notion of producing students. Now, once again, the language we use is interesting. I don't want to accuse anyone here, but I've been in school districts to talk about producing students. Like somehow we can stamp them. Does the guy on the side, sage on the stage discussion, my favorite version of that is the empty bucket theory of training. When you look out upon your audience and all you see are empty buckets, and I throw bricks of knowledge that rattle around in your head, and if you don't learn, your bucket's a little too narrow. We actually had a phrase where we go, yeah, that's a bucket, right? So this idea that somehow we are going to do this. We've moved in education psychology and education theory and teaching and learning theory to realize that we can't teach anyone anything. We can't teach anyone anything. You're sitting there going, not a great message, but we can create an environment in which people can learn. Right? What we have finally acknowledged is that some students are just too stubborn to do what's good for them, and that's it. Right? The idea that somehow we can sit there and go, this is really, back to the 14-year-old, thank God you're here. You really need to clean your room. Why? You just do. This idea that you must read at the 3rd grade level. I insist on it. Right? This idea that we can teach people doesn't work. So ultimately, all learning, all education, all parts of what we do is participatory. That in essence, we create fertile grounds that grow minds. And we're going to talk about how we create fertile grounds that grow citizens in a moment. So when we talk about access, we need to talk about access for all. I went through the teacher side. And it's very natural that as a technology committee gets together and begins talking, we begin talking about how the teacher is going to use it, what's available for the teacher to do. We talk about the bus system. The bus system. Oh, there's no technology there. Oh, yeah? My son came home and said, the bus driver has a radio, and he puts it on this station, and everyone gets quiet to listen to the music. A brilliant use of technology. Right? How can we, we're going to put iPads in the back of all of those wonderful things, right? Well, how can we use technology so that when they're on that bus, that's a useful experience, it's not a dangerous experience, it's a comforting experience? Can we? Can't we? How does it work? And let's face it, this is one of the biggest discussions you're going to need to have. This sign, no food, no drink, no cell phone, right? Take it, put it away. Close that monitor. Stop doing it. First of all, there's an interesting psychology thing going on, right? So I'm looking at you. None of you have, I'm not staring at any Apple logos, right? When you have monitor upon monitor, this is a college experience. And there are a lot of professors who, this is very bad. Put away your technology. If I catch you using technology, right? Well, it turns out that the brain is really, really kind of like my 14-year-old in that it never stops, right? And so the idea is that the brain has to be constantly stimulated. So I'll go and speak to groups, and I'll see people knitting. And at first I was like, what? Why are you making scarves? Don't you care what I'm saying? And the answer is, well, they may not have cared what I was saying. But the idea is that when you lose an attention, when it gets a little boring, a little dull, your brain begins to go, what else? What else? What else? Right? And that could be, I'm knitting. And that could be, I'm doodling. And that could be, I'm surfing, frankly. But the problem is that if you don't get that back, if it's not a lightweight activity, you lose them. So Jerry Gay did a study down at Cornell University where she looked at undergrads and said, what happens when technology's in the classroom, when they're using those computers? What she found was a couple things. First, the minute that you hit a sports site or a shopping site, you're gone. You don't come back to the lecture, right? The minute, it's like, la 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 la, socks. And so she also found that that meant that what I'm doing is probably not always the best way of presenting topics, and that is I'm talking at you. And you've been indoctrinated into this, but it's not the best way to learn. But I want to come back to a moment to this no cell phone, no food, no drink. Now, no food, no drink, I bought. But let's really talk about when we say no cell phone, what we mean these days. Because it's not what it used to be. By saying no cell phones, what you mean is no friends, no experts, no access, no comfort, no apps. Now, no friends, that might be helpful. But another interesting study, out of the UK where they looked at college students going online to search for articles. Same thing happened with high school students. They asked them, how was it searching for articles in these online databases? And the student said, quiet. And this is an interesting word to use, quiet. And now, as an information technology geek, as a library science geek, we talk about noise reduction all the time. That is, get rid of the extraneous stuff and get to the heart of it. So quiet might be a good thing, but that's not what they intended. What they meant was when I'm searching for information normally, when the Doobie Brothers concert is, or let's be honest, who the Doobie Brothers are, and then, once again, if you're a 14-year-old, what does Doobie mean? And then you're because the best part is they think it's one thing. You know, it's sort of a fart joke level humor, and then they find out it's another thing, and it gets much more interesting. So anyway. What that means is when they're searching for that information, they're texting friends, or they're IMing friends, or they have people that are communicating back and forth. They're working on a regular basis. My kid's now part of the Lego Mindstorm Challenge. Right? They have like all these Legos. He's in heaven, but my wife's sitting there with a 30-page manual going, this is not heaven. Right? So what does she do? She calls up her engineering friends. She calls up other parents. She brings together a whole community to learn this activity. Are you cutting that out? Are you cutting out, you say, comfort? Yeah. How many people have these smartphones again? Ever forget it at home? You just walk around doing this all day? Like do you know that there's actually a physiological condition called false vibrate? You're not crazy if you feel your pocket vibrating for no good reason. You're not crazy. It's normal now. It's normal to vibrate your pocket. We're not going there. All right? So the idea, and apps. All right, so I got to step into my parenting step one more to complain about something. My child had to buy a calculator for $130. There's no abacus that would cost $130. I mean, he had to buy. I could have gotten a free app that did more than the calculator, but because he could cheat by texting his friends on the test, we had to get this $180, $130 calculator. By the way, the first thing he learned is that it comes with a programming language and you can download ROMs that do Mario Kart. I thought that was kind of cool. When we say none of these, what do we mean? Now, I want to be very clear. There are times when you need to put this away. There are times when you need focus. There are times when this is a great delivery. But that's about pedagogy, not about some blanket statement or feeling about technology. If you look at this as a texting and phone, you're looking at it wrong. But I want to then bridge from this into a really interesting issue we had when we talked about this summer, which is that environment thing, right? So this is access. What about that environment thing you were talking about, Dave? What about a safe environment, and what does that have to do with the phone? Well, what it has to do with the phone is the other thing this is a status symbol, right? It's a fashion accessory. Do you have the latest? Oh, is it the biggest? Oh, it's Android. Oh, no, it's iPhone, whatever, right? And particularly in rural districts, we have folks that have them and folks who don't have them, and are we going to create an environment in which this becomes a dividing factor and not a joining factor? That is a great, important, and fabulous question. I don't have the answer, but I want to tell you that the good news is things are very different than how we used to think about it. By Moore's Law and the cloud. It's not Moore's Law, by the way. It's actually a little cut off, sorry about that. But anyway, Moore's Law. Moore was an engineer. He founded Intel. He was co-founder of Intel a long time ago. And he came up with this little observation. So here's the geek, for the geeks in the audience. Every 18 months, the number of transistors you could fit on a chip would double. That's roughly equivalent to doubling the capacity of a computer chip. Or the same number of transistors on the chip will cost half as much. Now, the computing industry has taken half that equation, right? The reason you need to buy a new computer, a new iPhone, a new iPad, it's faster, it's faster, it's faster, it's still $400. But this is a Chromebook. I heard you have initiatives with Chromebooks. They're $300. And they're relatively lightweight technology, so if you use a computer at home or you used a computer a while ago, it was kind of like, ooh, it's like a low processor and it won't, do Halo, and that's horrible. It's true, because all of the power, the oomph, the work is happening in data centers around this country. Actually, data centers in Oregon and outside of Western Virginia. These technologies allow a window into computing power. They're just a window. The computing power sits out on the net, and it's the same computing power for everyone. This terrifies Apple. This graph terrifies Apple. I don't know that personally, but it should terrify Apple. The graph is, the black line on that graph are iPhone sales. The beige line, gold line, is iPad sales. iPhone black, iPad. You'll notice that the iPad sales do this. Anyone have an iPad? Anyone feel a desperate need to have a new iPad? All right, two. See me afterwards. No. Can anyone tell me the difference between the third generation iPad and the iPad Air? Oh, it's thinner. It's thinner. It already weighs less than a pound, but it's thinner. I mean, that's actually dangerous, and I live on top of a hill. It will blow away soon. Apple on September 9th, Apple's going to supposedly announce the iPhone 6. Bum, bum, bum. And the two major selling features, it's bigger, and it has a sapphire screen that's hard to scratch. That's where we are. It's a sapphire screen that's hard to scratch. I can buy a piece of plastic. What people are finding is phone companies were hoping, oh, they'll upgrade every 10 seconds. Every year we'll get a new phone, a new phone, a new phone. And now people are realizing, I really can't think of anything else I want to do with this thing. And it's leveling off. So this status is very real. The good news is when we used to talk about one laptop, every student their own laptop, those were extremely expensive programs, not simply the initial investment, but ongoing upgrades, ongoing purchases. Now we're finding that technology bubble is beginning to level out, and we can begin providing technology for people. And we're never going to solve the status problem. But we think the other one is, I hold this up, you go, it's an iPhone. You say, no, Dave, that's a Superman phone. I see it. This is my lovely iPhone case, and you can't buy it, which means it's also illegal. I made it. I printed it out on a 3D printer at the Fayetteville Free Library. It cost me 80 cents. Now, and we're going to talk a little bit about it, but this idea that we can talk about status. The status isn't what I was able to buy, but look at what I can make. Right? I mean, for me, it's interesting. I was going to be the bass player in the band, so he had much more status than I did to me. Right? Thinking about how we create an environment that works. I don't know. Take a look. So, what did I do? This, that. Please work. No. All right, we're going over here. So, low-cost devices, a plateau of expectation, and we move computing to the cloud. This is, you can now buy through a group called Dropbox, a terabyte of storage for $10 a year. A terabyte of, you're going, Dave, I don't know what a terabyte is, but it's scary because it's got terror in it, right? A picture is 1 megabyte. You can get a movie in less than a gigabyte. This is a terabyte. It is an order of magnitude larger. I can't, it takes, this would be like every pirated movie your kid has ever downloaded illegally at home could fit on this terabyte drive. We see a difference in technology. We begin, as I said, to think about knowledge differently. So I talked about the idea that we construct knowledge together. We can't teach, but we can create environments to learn. So this is a manual. Anyone ever played Missile Command? This is for Atari. Right? So this was my youth. I could play asteroids for literally 3 hours at a time. And we're literally talking little dots, right? This is the technology that allowed you to have combat, which were tank battles, which were 3 rectangles and a bouncing square. That's the level, right? They came with manuals. This manual taught you how to play that game. You sit there and you go, and exactly what did they say in the manual? I mean, they started with things like, these are missiles, right? They had to create a story because, frankly, it wasn't there otherwise, right? But this is a screenshot of Halo 4. This is what I was doing last night. Now, what's interesting about this interface is you can see I got a gun, which is always good. I can see on the gun, I can actually see, here, I'm going to go over here. I can actually see how many bullets I have left, what device I've chosen. Ooh, do this. What device I've chosen, what my shields are at, very important. I can see where my enemies are, and this 3D rendered environment that looks better than my home, right? Guess what? No manual. It did not come with a manual. For Missile Command, I needed a 5-page manual. For this, 3D rendered in a radical 3D immersive environment where I'm playing a genetically altered computer-enhanced beast, no manual. Why? Because gamers learn what we know in school and we need to implement, which is you don't learn by reading the manual, you learn by playing the game. So the first level of this starts with you're being woken up after attack. Okay, Chief, let's check out your armor. Look up, look down. All right, can you follow me around? This is your shield. They're teaching you how to use the game within the narrative. How can we create an environment where kids are driving the narrative, where we're looking at the notion of creating something they care about and they're doing? Which obviously leads into the next thing, which is our motivation. Right? So here's a 3D environment. So I am proudly raising geek kids. My, at the time, 3rd grader came home and said, I want to create for my science fair project a library of the future. Thank you very much. I keep trying to convince my wife that getting them to memorize Monty Python quotes is the equivalent of contraception until they're 30. So, and this, Dave, is why the kids aren't at this talk. All right, so he starts drawing the library of the future. And then his brother says, let's go build it. And so they built it in Minecraft. If you don't know what Minecraft is, you don't have kids. There are 20 million users in it. It's Legos in a 3D immersive environment. You're going, Dave, I can have Legos in a 3D immersive environment. It's called my basement. I got that. But what you can't do is invite your friends in, and you can't, for example, install cannons and roller coasters on your Legos where you can here in Minecraft. I believe it's Denmark, has done a Minecraft model of the entire country. So you can actually join their server and wander around Denmark. There are people who are building computers, literally computing devices out of Minecraft activities. We have people going in learning engineering and such. But the story doesn't stop there, which is okay, he built it in this, but he had to go and show up with something. This is when Fayetteville first got their 3D printers. So what do? We downloaded his library of the future, we take it to the library, and he prints out his library of the future. And now he can go show it to his friends and see what's going on, and see what's happening. That's still not the story. His older brother was sitting this all the time. Lauren Britton, who started the Fayetteville Fab Lab, was there showing us the 3D printer. She goes, we're going to do this next week. We're having an open house. We're also going to do things like knitting. We're going to do things like forging. We're also going to do things like building things with duct tape if I can find someone to teach it. You have never seen my 9-year-old son, he had a phone at the time, I admit it, go, oh yeah, like this, like this, like this? This is my battle axe. This is, my kid sounds violently lazy, but anyway, he's a great kid. Anyway, he's showing, and Lauren just, without missing a beat, looks and goes, great, you're teaching it. And next week, he then taught it. And you've never heard the kids walk around going, that was the greatest library, we're going back tomorrow, it's amazing. When did they walk out of school going, that is the greatest school, I can't believe I did that, I'm amazing? I think we have those experiences. I know as a teacher, if you're like me, you have those stories, and they're important. How can we make more of them? How can we make these engaging experiences where the students drive the instruction, the students drive learning, it's their topics, and our expertise in guiding through, linking it to the knowledge, thinking about the core. Ultimately, that one word of participatory really means ownership learning, where the kids have ownership of the process. When they walk into the classroom, it is not your classroom, it is not their classroom, it is both of your classrooms. How are they going to learn? How are they going to be part of it? Now, I want to be really clear. True shared ownership is scary. I think of my son, and I think, I don't want to co-own my house with this kid. Right? You have students where you're afraid of them. I mean, sometimes physically afraid of them. I get it. But how can we build environments where they can excel and then we can take that energy and direct it? And as teachers, as bus drivers, as cafeteria workers, as secretaries, as administrators, how can we find that motivation that allows us to do the things we love and improve these students' lives and not simply what we've been trained to do? right? Because here's my ta-da, and then I'm going to shut up. What's scarier? Shared ownership of the classroom or shared ownership of society? Because this is the bottom line around participatory. Every person in these pictures, maybe not the dog, was in a classroom at some point. Whether you're wearing body armor and have the dog, whether you're hands up and hoping you don't get shot, whether you're sitting there in the tear gas or pointing the submachine gun, every one of the people in Ferguson was in a classroom at one point. Every decision they made on how to react, how to respond, what to do, how to protest, came from partially the experience they had for folks like you. And once again, not just the teachers, what it was like on the bus, what it was like to walk to school, what was it like cafeteria, what systems do we have in place, what are these personal learning plans? Am I important enough to have a personal learning plan? Every one of those people in this situation, either side, right or wrong, came out of this system of education. I don't mean Lafayette, but if you take a moment and you go, yeah, Dave, that's St. Louis. You're right, I'm sure you guys have no clue what it's like to have an ethnically diverse, slightly impoverished population with class issues. I'm sure that has no relevance whatsoever to this school district. The idea that we have different populations commingling, that we do have status, that we have socioeconomic scale across that spectrum. We have race issues. We have all of these representation issues. Is that truly so far away? Back to where I started. When I told the story of Alexandria, when I told the story of Ferguson, is the next story going to be Lafayette? Is the next one going to be Syracuse? I hope not. If it does, I have confidence in the people I've trained and the people I know in this district that they will take care of it, that they will rise to that occasion. But how can we prevent that? How can we make this community feel such an ownership that the idea of tearing down a wall or breaking a window is abhorrent? How can we create a student, a high school graduate, really a citizen of the United States who will someday inherit the leadership of this country? How can we make them feel powerful, important, knowledgeable,